So, today we're going to be talking about the life course perspective for sociology, and particularly when it comes to aging. It would be really short sighted to think about what older people are going through today is only because of today. We have opportunities and constraints at every single age of our lives, and how our entire societal outlook about aging has changed really makes a difference for how an older person is experiencing aging. So, I wanted to talk to you about some of the ways that the life course perspective works today. So, if we look at what the life course framework is, remember, this is just the interaction of historical events. Now, I'm recording this today on 9/11. There's a great example of an historical event that has definitely shaped our society. So, we're going to look at historical events, individual decisions and opportunities, and the effect of early life experiences. These all determine later life outcomes. So, no person within a society is really living within a bubble where they don't have to consider how society is actually determining what their chances and opportunities are. The life course trajectory is simply that pattern that people go in and out of these roles throughout their entire life course. So, right now, a role that you have slid into is the role of being student. For some of you, this is occurring during what we consider traditional college age, between the ages of 18 and 22. But with an online course, we would expect a lot of you to actually be a little later in your life course. And by that, it really is an illustration that not every switch in and out of a role happens the same for everybody in our society. When the majority of people establish that they go through a certain transition at a certain age, that's considered a normative timing for that role. So, let's give an example of how well this is structured within our society. We're going to college at the beginning of our career time, and that's really purposeful. So, typically, one of the goals that we have in our society is to make sure that adults are actually contributing back to society. This is such a societal goal that we have free education for everybody leading up to this. And then we really push students to receive their higher education so that they can become effective workers. So, in that way, the traditional way that we have looked at the life course from a work perspective is that it starts with education. You get all of that out of the way, and then you begin your beginning job and you work for a number of years, and then you eventually retire. That's a very simplistic and somewhat outdated mode of how work happens within the United States. I just read that about 40% of our workers are not even in traditional jobs. They're in piecemeal work where they are short term contractors. And so when we look at all the different ways that work as a social institution is changing, when we say that, what we mean is, how are these norms? How are these norms changing for people? Do they have an opportunity to go in and out of the workforce? Do they have opportunities to go in and out of schooling? And as we become more acclimated to that, and universities such as Westfield starts developing more tools to allow students to re-enter the student sphere at more points of their life. So we actually have a Department of Continuing Education, which is really just that, saying older students who already have life experience, they may need different skill sets and different supports than what traditional age students have. And really, this is all expanding our understanding of what it takes to be a worker that falls then into retirement. So, I want to talk a little bit about three interrelated ways that we study aging. And this is really important concepts to understand when someone does not think about these types of concepts. You may have a very different understanding of what's happening to someone and blame it on something that's not actually true. So, gerontologists study older people. We know this. Gerontology is the study of aging. But you can't assume that everything that is happening with an older person is simply because they are older. So we can look at actual three different trends that are related, and they all need to be considered when we're studying the elderly. The first trend is an age effect. This is a change that occurs as a result of advancing age. I'm going to give you an example. Let's say women wearing makeup. We know that for a lot of older women, they don't wear makeup as much as younger women. So we could assume, at the most simplest, that an older woman is not going to wear as much makeup because of the aging effects on her body, and she doesn't like the way it looks as she's older. So that's simply an age effect. She wore it at one point, and then she reached a certain age, and she's not wearing it anymore. Now, that's such a sexist and somewhat ridiculous thing to study, but for some reason it was the first thing that came to my mind. But if you look at, okay, what's another thing that's an age effect? Well, we could look at people's political opinions. We know that older people are a lot more conservative than younger people. Is it that people, as they age, become more conservative? Well, if that was the only thing going on, that the only factor that would cause someone who's older to be more conservative than someone who is younger, we would say, oh, that's an age effect. As people get older, their political opinion changes. Most effects are not that clear cut and only because of age. So let me talk to you about a couple of other effects, namely the period and cohort effect, that also really play with this notion. So a period effect is the impact of an historical event on the entire society. I said a couple minutes ago that when we look at the effect of 9/11 on our entire society, it's a little hard to directly see what's different, but when we look at things like cell phone usage, and the need for everybody in our society to suddenly have a cell phone really was a direct result of 9/11. 9/11 was one of the first times that a lot of cell phone towers became a lot of the cell phone towers that were part of the World Trade Center actually became damaged and destroyed. But throughout that entire day, and even in the weeks after 9/11, there were many people who could not communicate with their loved ones because landlines were down, and we didn't yet have the technology for cell phones as widespread as we do today. So that really, from a period effect, we see a lot of people directly after 9/11 have cell phones, whereas before 9/11 they did not. It was starting to trend. Cell phones were available prior to 9/11, but the majority of people did not find a cell phone a necessity until after that historic event. And that's for all people within our society, not just a certain age group, but across the board. People started saying, wow, you know what? I really should be a little safer and more accessible, and I should have a cell phone. And that can be directly related to that period effect of how 9/11 really impacted our entire society. Now, another effect is a cohort effect, and this is a social change that occurs not so much because you aged and not because the entire society has experienced something at the same time, but because of where you were in your life course when something happened, and everybody in your cohort may be experiencing that. So let's go back to the makeup. It so happens that a lot of baby boomers who were active in the women's rights movement were also staunch supporters of not wearing makeup. And so when we look at women across the life course, there is an existing hole in consumers for makeup that came of age right at the beginning of the women's movement, and were rejecting makeup as very part of patriarchy and not wanting to follow that trend. And so women of a certain age will tend to have very similar patterns on some things because it was very popular for that age group of women or men during a certain time. And that norm has carried over time. So that would be different from someone saying, now that I'm older, I'm not going to wear makeup. Or, since the women's, since the Women's March and the entire civil rights movement. Actually, those are two separate things, and I know that, but sometimes it's hard when you're talking nonstop as a lecture. It's hard to keep your mind focused. So, anyway, sorry about that. I could stop right now and have to redo the whole tape, or I could just be like, not perfect. So, there you go. But anyway, period effect would be something that affected everybody across the board. Cohort effect is a certain age of people because of where they were within the life course when something happened. And cohort effects might be something more similar, like what kind of music a certain age group likes. So I really like Pink Floyd. You could make a lot of assumptions about who I am if I like Pink Floyd today, but really, I grew up with Pink Floyd. That was like the first cool band when I was younger, and all people my age tend to have a certain liking for that group. I would see that more as a cohort effect than anything else. So, cohort, age, period effects. If you don't understand the concepts, if I haven't explained it in a way that really makes you grasp it, let me know. I can come up with a lot more examples, and I've provided a few more in the module for you. So these three effects are important. I think I kind of just talked this over, but why these three effects are important? First of all, if we don't study all of these various effects concurrently, or at least consider that, hey, this might not just be about aging, or this might not just be about when this person was born, well, then we can end up being erroneous in the conclusions that we draw. So, the makeup example, we can come up with completely illogical reasons for why we think social trends are occurring if we don't keep all of these perspectives in check. So, again, are older persons more politically conservative than younger persons? We could use that kind of social analysis and really look at it through these lenses. Well, we could also say, does intelligence decline with age? If you looked at things like that, we can see that older people do not score as highly on some intelligence tests, but the older cohort, those who are over the in the oldest old category, 85 and older, they did not go to school for entire college graduations. Many people from this cohort didn't graduate high school. So again, is that an aging effect, or is that a lack of equal access to resources throughout the life that's showing up? So we can also look at the timing of life course transitions throughout one's life. And the timing is really how well is someone adhering to this schedule that we have rigid in our minds as a society of when it's appropriate to do something and when you're off time. So age norms are the cultural expectation of the approximate age one should be for experiencing a life event. This is somewhat trivial, but I remember back in, well, I don't know when this movie came out, but that movie, The 40-Year-Old Virgin. I mean, that's a classic play on age norms, an entire movie saying, this person is too old to not have experienced this yet. And it really was just making light of age norms in our society that we have very rigid cultural expectations of when certain things should be done. Some of these age norms are lessening, but some remain very, very strict. And it's not only when you're too old to do something, but also when you're too young. When we look at something like the age to get married, we have a lot of age norms on the opposite end that, oh, you're not ready for this yet. So when an individual goes through a rite of passage at the same time that most people do, we just consider that on time. It's so much a part of our culture that we don't say, wow, looks like you're going to be going to college on time with the rest of people that you're mostly the same age with. And we certainly don't talk like, wow, you're returning to school. That sounds like a real off time event. We just don't talk in those ways, but from the gerontological jargon, that's what on time and off time simply mean, whether or not you're experiencing a rite of passage through your life that is on par with the majority of the population, or if you're having a different timing. If you were, that's off time. So some examples of these rites of passage that we look at gerontologists. How old is too old to still be living at home? we know that that age has risen and keeps rising